All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to welcome to Wednesday. Thank you for being here for a little bit of history today. Unadi is here. Good morning to you, and thank you for giving this live stream a thumbs up, even though nothing's happened yet. I appreciate I appreciate the support. Okay. Yesterday, yesterday I'd asked you to read a short section of the text, and we talked a little bit about Stalingrad and El Alamein, and then the four places in which the Allied leaders met in order to kind of hash out what was going to happen towards the end of the war, right? And so, what can you... Oh my gosh, okay. I'll just wait a minute. Good morning. Okay, ready? Okay, so I asked you some questions about Stalingrad, so I'm going to ask you again. What can you tell me about Stalingrad? 1942, what's going on and why?
The renewal of the offensive or something. The offensive towards the industrial complex.
Okay, so who's on the offensive here?
Germany.
Germany, right? So they're interested in taking Stalingrad, and why is that again? Why are the Nazis taking Stalingrad?
The Caspian Sea.
Caspian Sea and what? Yeah. What? Yeah. So what about the Caspian Sea?
It was kind of like the route that was carrying the supplies for the British to help them fight the war.
Okay.
If they won that, then the British would severely be crippled.
Okay. So Stalingrad is part of a supply line, right, from the Allies to the Soviet Union, and so again, if the Nazis can cut the supply line, they'll weaken the Soviet Union. What else is going on in Stalingrad? Well, yeah, but that's just Russia. That's just actually, it's nice there in the summer.
Have you been there?
I have 6 times. Not to Stalingrad. Oh yeah, industrial production. Yeah, so Stalingrad is a place where the Soviets are building war material, right? They're building tens of thousands of planes and tanks and machine guns, and so again, if the Nazis can take that'll...
They get the guns.
What's that?
They get the guns in
The Soviets are making guns, right? So if...
Tanks.
Yeah. Yeah, so if the Nazis can take that, then that will limit the power of the Soviet Union, right? This is a big one. Yeah, right? And so this is a big one for them. How does it go? How does this battle...
How did it turn out?
What's that?
How did it turn out?
Yeah, how did it turn out? Stalingrad. How did it turn out?
They
No.
weren't prepared to fight in the winter.
They what?
They weren't prepared to fight in the winter.
Yeah, that's part of it. But what else happens? What else happens to the Nazis in Stalingrad? They don't win. They don't take it. Yeah, well that happened a little bit earlier.
Love waffle? Love what?
The what waffle?
The
The strawberries waffles with
Well, that sounds really
whipped
good.
cream and maple syrup.
Like he was unable to bring the daily supply.
Right. So the Nazis get cut off, right? So the Soviets are able to encircle the Nazis so they can't they can't get out, right? They can't escape. And so the Nazis decide they're just going to sit tight until somebody can come and rescue them. The Luftwaffe, right? The Air Force, the German Air Force. Yeah, there we go. They're,
Luft means wings in German.
Luft means wings.
Luft means wings,
Yeah. And Waffe means waffle.
yeah.
Maybe I just want waffles. Maybe that's what it is. But so yeah, so the German Air Force is supposed to drop supplies into the Nazis so they can wait for help to come, but they're not really capable of doing it, right? They can't get enough supplies in, and what do the Germans have to do?
Surrender.
Yeah, right? For the first time in the war, right? So this is 1942. The war's been going on for 3 years, and finally we have a German defeat, right? Whew.
But that defeat played a big part in the Soviet Union's triumph.
Well, it's definitely a turning point in the war, I would say, and that's what we were talking about yesterday. I think is the idea that Stalingrad was a turning point in which, you know, the tide is starting to switch, right, and the Allies are going to start to be able to win some victories, right? Keep in mind that, you know, I think the textbook mentions this, but Hitler was really planning on a short war, right? He thought he was going to roll into a bunch of countries, and then, you know, they'd fight for a little bit, and then they'd stop and have negotiations, right? He thought that's what was going to happen, but of course, here we are 3 years in, and there's no sign of negotiations, right? That's not going to happen. So the war has kind of, you know, gone a little longer than he thought, and he's dealing with two fronts, right? He's dealing with the Allies, trying to keep them out of Europe, and he's trying to fight the Soviet Union on the other side. So he's kind of spread pretty thin in terms of his resources, and we see that in a couple places, right? When the Nazis storm into the Soviet Union and they try to encircle Moscow to get Moscow to surrender, they run out of supplies and men, right? They can't quite do it. Here, the same thing in Stalingrad. They get stuck, a bunch of the German army gets stuck, and they don't really have the resources to supply them, right? So again, this war has gotten a lot bigger and gone on a lot longer than he thought it would. And so resource-wise, he is stretched thin, and you're starting to see that, right? They're running out of supplies, they're running out of men. They can't really accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish, right? With Moscow and with Stalingrad, right? We talked a little bit about El Alamein, right, which is a battle in which the Allies kind of force the Nazis out of North Africa, right? And we said that that's important. I should have put that map in my PowerPoint here or in my slides, but that, yeah, Suez Canal at El Alamein. And then that gives the Allies kind of a jumping off point to get into southern Europe, right? Before, the Nazis controlled North Africa, and so that's kind of a buffer, right? They can keep people from jumping across and invading. But now the Allies have northern Africa, and they can sort of insert themselves into southern Europe somewhere. And where do they go in through? Yeah, right. They decide to enter Italy, and so what's the kind of the result of that for Italy? Yeah, yeah. So the Italian fascists are pretty quickly defeated. They surrender, right? The Germans extract Mussolini, right, which is pretty daring, but they get Mussolini out of there. The Italians give up, and then very shortly they turn around and declare war on Germany, right? So they switch sides, and yeah, the Allies have taken Italy. We said that the leaders met in 4 places, right? And I won't sort of go into those again, but I may ask them on a quiz. They met at where was it? Casablanca, Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam, right? And so in the process of those meetings, they decide on a few important things. What are maybe some of the important things that they decide at those 4 meetings? Wh- What to do with Germany? Okay, Andre, what were you saying? What's that? Okay, so yeah, they're strategic meetings, right? Who and what should be bombed? That's true. What else do they decide at those meetings?
The meeting was in Stalingrad or
The meeting, there were more than 4. I'm just kind of focusing on 4 here. At Casablanca and Tehran and Yalta and Potsdam. And so I think what's that?
Like they decided to split Germany to super as one as Soviet Union and one as US and
Right, so I think that might be, I forget if that's Tehran or Yalta, but yeah, they come up with the idea that Germany is going to be, what's that? Is it Tehran? Okay. So they decide that Germany is going to be split in half after the war, right? That's a big one, right? Because as we mentioned yesterday, there's a Cold War coming, and Germany is going to be where those 2 powers are kind of squeezed up against one another, right? The USSR and the USA, there's going to be nothing but a little border separating them, and there's going to be lots of conflict and tension around that area. So that's big, the decision that Germany will be partitioned in half. What else comes out of those meetings?
They asked Stalin for help on the other side with Asian defense.
Right, so there are agreements that Stalin will help out with the war on Japan a little bit later on, which he agrees to do. What else? Big things that they decide.
Polish
Oh, sorry, Mark first.
reparation, like they decided to
Right, they talk about reparations that Germany will have to pay. Is that at Casablanca?
it's in Yalta.
That's Yalta, okay. And sorry,
The Polish government.
right, the issue of Poland, right? Because remember, Poland had ceased to exist. That's what Hitler said, right? He rolled into the western half of Poland. Soviet Union rolled into the eastern half of Poland, and Poland it was Czechoslovakia that ceased to exist, but Poland had ceased to exist as well. So the Allies are now talking about kind of restructuring and reconstituting it as a country, but there's also some confusion about who the legitimate government is, right? The Allies are supporting one group that claims to be the Polish government, and Stalin is supporting another. But anyway, Poland will live again, right? What else? Important stuff. I think at Casablanca they agree that they're going to demand an unconditional surrender from Germany, right? So they will only be happy with, no timeouts, no, ceasefires, let's talk. It's basically till the death, right? Full surrender is what.
they wanted the Germany that they have to surrender themselves?
That's what the Allies that's all they were going to accept from Germany, is a complete unconditional I give up, right? And so, yeah, that's important too, right? And maybe there's one more thing that comes out of these meetings, and it's kind of a concept or an idea. And it rhymes with peers of sinfluence.
What does it rhyme with again?
Peers of sinfluence. Spheres of influence, right? So that's going to be an important concept coming up as well, right? Because we're going to have these 2 powers, the US and the USSR, and they're going to have sort of control over different parts of Europe, right? Different parts of Europe are going to be in their sphere of influence, right? And so those are starting to take shape even before the war is over. Cool? Okay. Yeah, even before the war is over, those areas are going to start to take shape, right? And the West is hoping that Eastern Europe will get, democratic governments and that Stalin will, stay out of it. Stalin is promising them that that's what will happen, but
He also refused the investigation for
the investigation?
like interrogation or something. I know Stalin refused to do something like that. The three powers wanted to do.
Oh, I'm not sure.
I can't remember. I know Stalin was being annoying.
Well, yeah, because these two are, the Soviet Union and Britain and the U.S. and Canada, they kind of ally themselves against Germany, right? Because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But as it looks like Germany is going to be defeated, suddenly these two sides start to pull apart again, right? And neither side really trusts the other one. Again, Stalin is going to try to have control over Eastern Europe. The Allies don't want him to, but they increasingly accept that that's probably the way it's going to be, right? And so, what's that?
Because they needed his help.
Because they need his help, right? But it's basically at Potsdam where things come apart, because the war is basically over, and so Stalin is not playing nice anymore, right? And so,
Then there was a massacre.
which one?
There were so many.
Oh, see if you can figure out which one it is, and then maybe we can talk about it. And so we said that these leaders meet here. They hash out the terms of Germany's surrender, the spheres of influence thing, where they're going to bomb, and sort of where they're going to enter strategically. And so they sort it all out. But increasingly, we're moving to a bipolar world, right? We're coming out of a multipolar world where Britain and France and Germany and the US, and there's all of these powers that are existing in the world. But at the end of this, we're going to be left with basically two big powers, right? Soviet Union and US. So it's going to be a big change at the end of the war.
There was the Polish massacre where the Red Cross wanted to investigate the Soviets.
Right. So yeah, there's an alleged massacre of Polish citizens, which of course the Allies would like to investigate, and Stalin kind of refuses and gets in the way of. Okay, so let's just see Stalingrad. We've got all those covered. Ah, yes, finally. So this is a big moment, right, in the history of World War II, the landings at Normandy. Has anyone seen these in? Has anyone seen the landings of Normandy in the movies, portrayed in the movies?
There's some trailers or some like clip on YouTube.
Okay.
I didn't watch the entire movie.
Okay. If you watch it's an older movie called Saving Private Ryan. If you watch that one,
Yeah, that movie.
yeah, Saving Private Ryan has an unbelievable sequence of this landing, right? So the Allies are kind of landing at the beach in these.
Oh, it's the one where they parachute in.
Some of them are parachuting in. Some of them come in these sort of like amphibious vehicles that they can then run up the beach. It was a bit of a disaster because they showed up a bit late. They were supposed to show up in the darkness,
And they were ready for it.
but they were, the Germans were ready for them, and they were delayed a little bit. So they showed up when it was already getting light. And so
All hell broke loose.
Saving Private Ryan does an excellent job of, oh man, like just, like trying to sort of fight your way onto the beach while people are machine gunning at you, and you're,
They won an award for that scene.
yeah, they probably did. It is unbelievable, right? It's just,
Movie won an Oscar as well, if I'm not wrong.
could be. Yeah, that and actually you'll also see it at the beginning of X-Men Origins Wolverine. At the beginning, because Wolverine and his brother have been fighting through all these wars, and so you'll see him there at Normandy as well.
Dunkirk is it? Oh no, no.
What's that?
Is it Dunkirk?
Oh, Dunkirk. Yeah, Dunkirk
I
is.
don't think they had this.
No, that's earlier, right?
Yeah.
But huge moment, right? And so you can see here 150,000 troops land on the beach. We've got Americans there, Canadians there, Brits there. Us Canadians do a great job, so we're proud of that. And then, once they actually gain the beach, they're able to start moving soldiers over. And soon they have about 600,000 troops in Europe, right? Which is huge, right? And so now the Allies can start to push back through France. We've got the Soviet Union pushing them from the east. Now we've got another army pushing the Germans from the west, and they're going to squeeze them back into Germany, and eventually they're going to meet, right? The Allied forces and the Soviet forces are going to meet at the Elbe River, and basically when they do, then it's over, right? Because they've conquered all of formerly held Nazi territory, right? So just a little map for you. You can see these different divisions at different beaches. If you look there at Juno Beach, you'll see that's us Canadians, but we didn't have our Canadian flag yet. Our flag is actually younger than the. This is the northwestern coast of France. Yes, and so this is the Allies kind of crossing the English Channel from Britain, landing in France, and then they're going to push their way into Paris and then back towards.
In the movie, said in the Stalingrad, the Germans were coming from the sea.
Nope, other way around. So the Germans have the land, they have the coast, and the Americans and the Canadians and the Brits have to land on the beach, try not to get shot, and try to sort of move in close enough so they can get some shelter, and then sort of take over those positions. But it's bloody and awful. And again, if you watch the opening of Saving Private Ryan, you will see what I mean. It's terrifying, right? And like and there's nowhere to go, right? Like you're in this box, and the box spits you out on the beach, and it's just and it's,
At the end, the water was full with blood.
it's horrific, right? It's absolutely horrific. But again, it's successful, right? And so the Allies are able to sort of gain the beach, they're able to move more troops in, and then they're able to start pushing the Germans back. And so this is, I'm going to go back here just to check my date. Yeah, so starting in June of 1944, and a mere 2 months later, France has been liberated, right? So France is free again, and the Allies are headed into Germany, right? Another map. Okay. Hitler's death. A legend. Well, it's true, right? There are a lot of conspiracy theories about whether Hitler actually died, right? Is that true? Have you heard? What do you think? Do you think he's dead? You think he's dead?
He is amazing. He is very crazy, and I don't think he can accept the new things and go on life as a.
Could be, yeah. Like you don't think he could accept like the defeat of? Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that like when was he born? 1899 or something? 1898? So, yeah, so he'd be like 123 years old now. So he's definitely dead now. But some people suggested that in fact he hadn't died in the war and he
Yeah, there was so many conspiracy theories.
somehow escaped, right? But
You must
the official story is this, right? The official story is that, this is in April 45, where basically the Soviets are coming into Berlin. It's all over, right? Once the Soviets take Berlin, the Nazis are finished. And so, yeah, Hitler commits suicide. Actually, I think shortly after marrying his longtime girlfriend Eva Braun. So they get married, and then immediately after,
He offs
he offs
himself.
himself and her and their dog, I think, right? Yeah. So he kills himself, and before he does, he says to his first in command, his next in command, he says, fight till the last man, right? Until every German is dead. Keep fighting. Do not surrender. So Hitler kills himself, and very quickly after, his first in command or his second in command said, "That's ridiculous. We're not doing that." And so basically, shortly after Hitler's suicide, he contacts the Allied command and says, "Okay, we surrender. We're done." So yeah, you can see here that the bodies were burned, but April 30th, apparently the bodies of both Hitler and Eva Braun are found in the bunker. For those of you who are prone to conspiracy theories or might want to entertain other ideas, there were lots of rumors that he had somehow escaped, maybe that he went to Argentina. Yeah, who knows, right?
Yeah, there might be little Hitlers running around.
Well, maybe. But here, look, in April 2018, so this is just 3 years ago, the English publication of Memoirs of a Russian Interpreter said that she had been given this set of teeth from the Second World War, and they were kind of stored away in Russia for years, and here they are. So these are human remains. These are human teeth. You can see there's been a lot of dental work done, right? There's a lot of metal mixed into there.
Supposed to be Hitler's teeth.
Yeah. So the scientists who kind of gained access to this, French scientists, analyzed them, and yeah, in this journal article here from May 2018, they compare the teeth with dental records that we have from Hitler at the time, and those dental records are those primary sources, if you will. They match the teeth that we have.
I feel like anyone could argue that at that time anything is possible, right? You can take anything you want.
Well, yes, but teeth are pretty interesting. So I used to be an archaeologist in a previous life. Teeth are very interesting because they are very durable and they survive very well, right? Because they're basically minerals that your body forms, right? So even after you are buried and your bones kind of disintegrate away, often the teeth will be left because they're super hard and super strong. Also, they are, they form in your mouth when you're young, and then they basically stay that way for the rest of your life, right? You don't get any more enamel, but if you get any cracks or sort of wear points or things like that, those become very distinctive, right? Everyone's teeth are entirely identical, right? And especially when you start looking at someone who clearly had pretty horrible teeth. He had lots of fillings. You can see some bridges, right, where there were teeth missing. He had some very distinctive dental work, right? Because again, you've got his existing teeth, but then you've got all of this extra, metal and fillings and all kinds of things too. And so these things are very distinctive, and it'd be tough to fake, right? As long as you feel that you have accurate dental records from him, which I suspect they probably did. As long as you have accurate dental records, I don't know, you couldn't fake the teeth. Like the teeth are just too unique.
I was more thinking of that someone someone
Oh.
else's teeth.
If the dental records are accurate, I doubt it, because teeth are just so unique, right? And especially, once they're formed, then you start to, maybe you break little pieces, or you get a filling, or maybe you have a tooth pulled, or maybe your teeth don't, they sort of wear against each other in certain ways. Like you can't fake that, right? Their teeth are just far too unique, right? And so, yeah, if the dental records they have are legit, those are his teeth. Which they're kind of gross, actually. They don't look. Although, granted, his body was burned, right? So there was burning that happened as well.
So much overkill.
Overkill,
After the cyanide, he still shot himself.
or somebody shot him to make sure, right? But yeah, so if you are concerned that Hitler may have escaped, or if there were little Hitlers running around, the evidence suggests that indeed not, that he did die in that bunker. These are his teeth.
That's weird.
That's weird. It is weird.
Do you think someone could do what Hitler did in the time now?
Yeah, there is the Syrian president.
Could someone do now what Hitler did?
Like, wage a full-scale world war?
I don't know.
Syria, if you look at from another corner, we have Russia, we have America, we have Turkey, and all of them fighting with each other. They probably speak some kind of little bit same as Hitler.
Yeah.
But Assad has Iran and Russia, and anything what he's doing, it will be like officially okay because those countries are divided. So
Yeah.
it's Hitler, but on the paper. Officially.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? It's also maybe worth saying that, Hitler was, a dictator, an authoritarian. He was, he perpetrated a genocide. He started a war, and do we still have dictators today?
Many.
Yeah. Do genocides still happen? Yeah. Are wars still triggered? Yeah, right? And so, all of these things are still happen, and so, yeah, I don't think it's, things would never happen exactly the same, but yeah, I don't think it's.
Now I think there'll be like a nuclear war. Everyone dies.
Well, that's what we'll get to shortly, right? Because the first nuclear weapon is kind of being invented here as we speak, right? We're in 1945, so.
Did they bomb anywhere else besides Japan?
It was no.
Yeah, Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki are the only combat uses of nuclear weapons. Lots of tests happen before and after, but those are the only.
I think Nagasaki still suffers effects from the nuclear.
Yeah, until now.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm not wrong, they can't like grow anything there. They can't grow plants there. They're all full of radiation.
I think the radiation has decreased. Like
But
it
it's still present. Like it's higher than maybe now.
There's no lag there also because it's of the affecting of the that what it's called.
yeah. Yeah, I think they're still they were certainly effective for a long time afterwards, right? But yeah, so now we have an even worse situation, right? Where Hitler didn't have nuclear weapons, but imagine if he did. What's that?
Everyone has a nuke now.
Yeah, but imagine if he did. But let's pause on the nuclear weapons thing because we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that. So yeah, he did not. So Hitler does not escape. He does not flee to Argentina or to a secret underwater base or whatever.
Dark side of the moon.
The dark side of the moon. He's the man is dead, right? The man is dead. So yeah, so here we are on May. This is a week later, right? So Hitler kills himself kind of in late April, I think April 30th, and a week later, the German High Command issues their their surrender, right? Their unconditional surrender, which is what the Allies want. So again, this is, finally we've come to an end to the war in Europe anyway. The Allies are victorious. But again, another conflict is going to almost happen immediately afterwards. Or some might argue that actually it starts while the Second World War is still going on, right? We have the beginnings of this Cold War beginning to develop, right? Between kind of Western democracy, represented by the US, and Soviet communism, represented by USSR, right? So again, where you actually start the Cold War depends on which historian you're talking to, but we basically get no break from conflict, right? We finish one world war and we're into another period of conflict, right? But before we get there, we do have to deal with Japan, right, and what's happening in the Pacific War. I'm not going to spend too much time on it. I think a lot of you have probably studied this portion of the war before. It's also kind of, it's part of World War II, but in many ways it's also it's a totally different war, right? There's different parties some different parties involved, and it's a pretty separate conflict, okay? So what I'd like to ask you to do, and I know this is a bit of a long passage, but I'll make it up to you by showing you a movie in a day or so. So that'll be the prize for this. So, but in the meantime, what I'd like you to do is read through this section. It will just talk about the Pacific War and sort of get us caught up, talk a little bit about nuclear weapons and issues surrounding those, and then we'll have a film. And the film is kind of, the film is actually a good answer to, the question. Mahmoud, did you ask it? Could something like this happen today, or was that, yeah, yeah? And the film is kind of an answer to that idea. Could we have a similar situation, right? But what I'll ask you to do, is read this section of the text. We'll talk a little bit about what's happening in the Pacific, just very quickly, and then we'll kind of proceed onward. Okay? So. The section is in Microsoft Teams here for you to read, and I'll check in with you in just a little bit and see how we are, okay? Okay, let's see if we can talk about this quickly here. So the first question here that I'm asking you is the primary cause for the Pacific War and how does it begin? So what's the purpose of this war?
Control, power, maybe power, like Japan wants to want power.
Okay, so Japan is looking to extend its power a little bit. What else? What else do they want?
Some raw materials like resources.
Yeah, because they're kind of going through a little bit earlier. They're going through the same kind of industrialization process as Germany went through, as France went through, as Great Britain went through, where they need raw materials to industrialize and produce all these products. So Japan is just doing the same thing, but they're starting later than the other powers, right? They're starting in the kind of in the 1920s, the 1930s, and so they're going through the same thing. They're just starting later, right? But they need raw materials, and where are they trying to find it?
Southeast Asia.
Definitely in Southeast Asia, but where first are they?
Hong Kong?
Nope.
No. Philippines. Later.
Well, ultimately all of those places, but the first place they get involved in is in China, right? Is in Manchuria.
Oh,
Yeah, so the Japanese invade Manchuria because it's got lots of timber, it's got lots of mineral resources, and they want to extract those for themselves and use them for their industrialization, right? So they get into some conflicts in Manchuria with the Chinese. The League of Nations is involved at one point, but they're not really able to do anything. Okay?
How do they do that? How they use this code just to make fresh air?
Oh,
I don't think we can.
no, you can't open these windows. We do have an excellent air filtration system in the building. So
Still smells
yeah, you can smell it a little bit, but it's almost everything is filtered out. Yeah, so we're just getting a little hint of the smell. Right. So the Japanese are trying to industrialize. They're trying to gain some sort of a sphere of influence in the Pacific, and so they're involved in Manchuria, trying to get resources out of there. But they also want to build their own little empire. Yeah, and so they're going to launch a series of invasions, right, to kick this off. And where do they invade? They kind of go around the Pacific and go boom, 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 boom.
They went down.
Yeah. So where do they strike? Philippines,
Malaya,
Malaya,
Singapore, and Hong Kong.
Singapore, Hong Kong,
Indonesia as well.
Indonesia, Hawaii, of course, right? So they kind of strike all of these places.
Hawaii was one of the
Yeah,
They needed that to get to the.
yeah. So they kind of just come down and launch strikes against everybody all at once, right? So the war is kind of starts with a bit of a bang, right? And it's interesting because the Japanese have the same kind of basic plan as Hitler, right? They're going to attack everybody really quickly, and hopefully within a few months or within the year, they'll be negotiating, right? So none of that. So the Japanese can't really fight a long war, particularly with the United States either. So they're kind of betting on a quick bunch of fighting and then a timeout, and then we'll negotiate. But it seems that the Americans aren't.
They decided to poke the bear.
They kind of did poke the bear, right? The Americans weren't happy at their air base being attacked out of nowhere, especially in Hawaii, because Hawaii is such a laid-back place, and
You can barely see it on the map. It's so really
Hawaii?
Yeah, Hawaii.
It's tiny.
You can barely see it on the map, so it's not necessary for them.
I went there actually, and might be 10 years ago now. But I went to Hawaii, yeah, and I drove around the whole island in a day, on a moped. It's not that big. One of the islands anyway. There's a bunch of them, Yeah, it's not a big place, but that kind of kicks off the Pacific War, right? And so the Japanese are going to try and take over that area. They're going to try and build sort of fortifications in islands around there so that nobody can get in, right? That's their plan. So, as we said, this war kind of, is Japanese. It's all Japan for the first couple of years, right? So the U.S. and other allies aren't really prepared to take them on. They're dealing with Hitler in Europe, and so the Japanese are able to kind of push the British and the French out of their sort of colonial territories. But as you read, their excitement is short-lived, right? Because the Japanese kind of treat these people pretty brutally, and they've just, exchanged one colonial master for another, really. And so things don't go very well for the conquered populations, but of course the Japanese are very successful and happy about it for the first 2 years until the European war starts to wind down, and then the U.S. can kind of turn their attention to. And then, well, I don't know if they did, but they probably should have. Because after that, things start to go downhill for them, right? And yeah. Well, and kind of the reverse thing happens, right? Where the Japanese come out and sort of conquer everything in an arc, right? And then the Americans kind of do the same thing. They sort of island hop their way toward Japan, right? Conquering islands as they go. And then they're finally kind of confronted with, they have kind of success after success, and there's, battles at Midway and Guadalcanal and Okinawa and all these places until they finally get to the island of Japan itself, right? And then there's kind of a decision to be made, right? And what's the decision to be made once the Americans are kind of at the Japanese doorstep, if you will? What do you do now, right? So what are the options? Right, so an invasion of the island of Japan itself, right? So that's one option. What's another option? Right, so Harry Truman, Roosevelt is dead now, right? President Roosevelt is dead. Harry Truman is the new president, and somebody, of course, whispers in his ear and says, "Hey, President Truman, this new wonder weapon is ready to go, right? We've tested it. Yeah, we've tested it. It's more powerful than anything, and we can use it, right?" There's a couple of other plans too. What does the textbook mention? So there's a full-scale invasion. There's the nuclear option. Yeah, I guess the negotiation is always on the table, but I think both of these sides were not willing, right? So the Japanese are not open to it, and the Americans had already decided that they wanted an unconditional surrender as well, right? So I think somebody mentions maybe setting mustard gas loose and letting it drift over the island of Japan. That seems quite brutal. Somebody else mentions burning the crops, right, and letting the people starve. That seems quite brutal as well, but of course it's a war and all of these options are brutal. But basically it's between those two things, right? The nuclear option and the option to to invade, right? To invade the island of Japan. So what are the kind of pros and cons of invading the island? Right, so it's not going to be an easy process. It's going to might take another year or two to finish the war.
They just finished so much stuff with the war. They just wanted everything to finish. And I don't think that many countries have any more resources to fight another war.
It could be, right? So, and that's worth talking about, right? Because wars, as we know, are super expensive, right? And a year or two more of war is going to cost money, and the Americans have been fighting a war for 4 or 5 years, right? And probably propping up Great Britain, right? Because Great Britain was struggling earlier on, and the U.S. is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here, right? So, yeah, there's a big price tag for continuing this war. Why else might you or might you not want to invade the island of Japan? Expensive, takes a long time. What else?
The risk is too high.
What's that?
The risk.
The risk? What kind of risk?
Very
What happens if you lose?
yes.
The what?
What happens if you don't, like if the invasion is unsuccessful?
True, right? If you are not successful, then what?
It's
Right?
an island also. If you will not make it, you will die or
It's very hard to reconquer the island because like Japan has many different islands
Yeah.
separate evenly.
Yep.
And then when the army attack one island, they can just like flank them behind a surround.
Right. So it's a complicated sort of geographical
game over
target.
the enemy.
Yeah, there's lots of different islands. Japan's also very mountainous, right? And mountains, yeah, mountains are hard. Mountains are hard to fight in as well.
Miss.
Mists, right? That's hard to. Yeah, it's gonna be difficult. Do you think the Japanese will surrender easily?
Not knowing that,
No, right? So yeah, we've already seen them, or we've already read about them doing their kamikaze raids where they fly their planes right into your ship, right? And so the Americans are thinking these aren't people who are going to surrender very easily, if at all, right? How many lives do they think this is going to cost?
countless.
Well, they do count. They do make an estimate. What do they say?
Both of sides lost a lot of soldiers and resources.
Yeah.
I saw a documentary about the American soldiers were in the island,
Yeah.
and how the Japanese forces were following them, and how could they survive. It was a national geographic movie, so it was really interesting. How
Oh.
they did it.
Oh, cool.
From like 1,000 people, around 200 or 100 flags, and the others are all red because the island was. Can you imagine something like that? Island without any resources.
Yeah.
So this documentary was.
Yeah. So it's high. So it's difficult, right? Islands are difficult to attack. The Japanese are not willing to surrender. War is expensive, and this might go on for another 2 years. I think the book estimates maybe 1 million. What's that?
The book estimated 12 months.
12 months and 1 million American soldiers that this is going to cost, right? So never mind the number of Japanese casualties, which I assume will be more. So if they invade this island, it's going to take a lot of time and money, and a lot of people are going to die, right? And so what's the other option?
Testing out the nukes.
Testing out the nukes, right? Brand new technology. What are the kind of pros and cons of this approach?
Pros, they were very disruptive.
Okay.
Cons, they didn't know what was going to happen.
Well, so the very destructive thing is a pro?
I mean, like, it had the ability to like completely wipe out Japan.
Yeah, right. So I guess it's a good thing to threaten people with, right? So if you want to force their surrender, the idea that I can destroy your entire city with one bomb, that's a solid deterrent, right? People will sit up and take notice, hopefully.
Yeah, that was the first ever.
Yep.
So Japan said, "Try me."
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that nobody, I think on the Japanese side, they were probably taken off guard, right? Nobody knew.
I don't think there was a warning. It just dropped.
Yeah, it was unexpected, right? The second one was not, right? I think the Americans threatened that they would drop another one unless the Japanese surrendered, which they didn't, not at first.
Yeah. And then they were like, okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but yeah, so what are the pluses and minuses here? Like, imagine you're President Truman. So here you've got an invasion plan that's long and expensive and might, you know,
It saves time, it saves lives,
it's quick, it's cheaper,
it's efficient.
right? How many American lives are going to be lost?
0.
Zero, right? And again, who does Truman work for? Yeah, he works for the American people, right? So the American people are probably going to want to hear, oh, you can end this war with no more American casualties?
Do it now.
Do it, right? This is a good plan. But what's the downside of using this weapon?
Everyone else will want to get one.
Yeah, right? So this is a major bump up in technology, right? And as soon as it's used, other people will need that weapon as well, and they'll start developing it, which actually is not even true because the Russians were already working on a nuclear weapon when the first bomb fell on Hiroshima. The Soviets had spies inside the American government. They knew the American government were working on this weapon, but Stalin didn't really know they had perfected it until they used it. But still, he was already in the process.
It was almost there.
Yeah.
5 years.
Yeah, another 5 years, but he was already working on it. So yeah, this ushers in an age of a much more frightening age, right, with much more destructive weapons. But that is all the time we have. So come back tomorrow. Come back tomorrow, and we will talk about a little bit about the nuclear weapons, the Manhattan Project. Then I have a film to show you. Okay, but until then, see you tomorrow.
Did you say the Manhattan